The bronze letter opener felt heavy in Sarah's hand, a relic of a past life she'd tried to bury under lesson plans and grading rubrics. She wasn't supposed to be in the library at 9 p.m., but the silent motion sensor alert on her phone had bypassed the school's main security grid, a private modification she'd installed herself. The beam of her tactical flashlight sliced through the darkness of Oak Ridge High, illuminating dust motes dancing like tiny ghosts. She reached the history section, row 4, shelf G. Every night for a week, a book had moved. Tonight, it was The Rise and Fall of the Great Powers. It sat 3 inches further out than its neighbors. Sarah didn't reach for it with the curiosity of a teacher. She approached it with the practiced caution of an operative clearing a room. She pulled the volume. It felt wrong, too light. As she cracked the spine, a folded piece of vellum fluttered to the floor. Before she could retrieve it, the heavy oak doors of the library groaned. Sarah extinguished her light and melted into the shadows of the reference section, her breathing shallow and rhythmic. Footsteps echoed, heavy, rhythmic, boots. A flashlight beam, far more powerful than a civilian model, swept the room. It lingered on the gap where the book had been. Sarah watched from the darkness, her eyes adjusting. The man was large, wearing a generic security uniform, but he moved with a military gait she recognized instantly. He wasn't the night shift regular. He was a cleaner. The man muttered something into a radio, a string of alphanumeric code that sounded like a grid coordinate. Sarah shifted her weight, her foot catching a discarded pen. The click was microscopic, but in the dead silence, it sounded like a gunshot. The guard snapped his light toward her position. Sarah didn't panic. She drew a deep breath, letting the calm of her former life wash over her. She wasn't just a history teacher. She was a ghost of the Bureau's deep-cover division. She waited until the beam was inches from her face, then she moved. She didn't run. She transitioned. In one fluid motion, she slid behind the next shelf, grabbed a heavy bookend, and threw it toward the opposite corner. The guard pivoted, and Sarah bolted for the emergency exit. She didn't push the bar. She knew it was alarmed. Instead, she used a magnet she'd taped to the frame earlier that day to trick the sensor. She slipped into the hallway just as the guard's light hit the door. Outside, the cold Virginia air bit at her face. She reached into her pocket and felt the vellum she'd snatched off the floor. Under the glow of a distant street lamp, she unfolded it. It wasn't just a map. It was a blueprint of the school's foundation, marked with red ink that indicated a basement level that didn't exist on any public records. In the center of the non-existent room was a single name written in elegant, terrifyingly familiar script. Her own. The morning sun offered no warmth as Sarah sat in the faculty lounge, nursing a lukewarm coffee. Her eyes were fixed on Principal Miller, who was laughing too loudly at a joke from the guidance counselor, Marcus. Miller was a man of expensive suits and cheap promises, a career bureaucrat who had turned Oak Ridge High into his personal fiefdom. Sarah watched the way his eyes darted to the security monitors behind the desk. He was nervous. She could see the microtrimmers in his hands, the same hands that, according to the map in her pocket, had signed off on structural renovations 5 years ago that cost 3 times the school's annual budget. "Sarah, you look tired," Marcus said, sliding into the chair across from her. Marcus was the school's emotional tether, a man who knew every student's trauma but kept his own tucked behind a wall of empathy. "The curriculum committee keeping you up?" "Just a restless night, Marcus," Sarah replied, her voice a perfectly calibrated mask of teacherly fatigue. "The library was left in a mess yesterday. I was thinking of helping Mrs. Gable reorganize the history section." Marcus's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Gable is out on medical leave, remember? Miller brought in a private firm to handle the inventory, said the old system was inefficient." Sarah nodded slowly. The private firm was likely the source of the man with the military gait. She finished her coffee and headed toward her first period class, but her mind was mapping the school's geometry. If the blueprint was accurate, the hidden level sat directly beneath the gymnasium. There were no stairs, no elevators, and the blueprint showed no obvious entrance. It was a sealed vault. Walking through the hallway, she noticed Leo, a senior with a genius-level IQ and a rap sheet for high-end hacking, leaning against his locker. He was looking at her with an intensity that bordered on a challenge. As she passed, he whispered, "The packets are encrypted with AES 256, Miss Thorne, but they're leaking through the school's Wi-Fi." Sarah didn't stop, but she slowed her pace. Leo was a wild card, but he was observant. If he was seeing data leaks, it meant the hidden room wasn't just a physical storage space, it was a hub. She needed to get into the server room, but that was located inside the main office, guarded by Miller's hand-picked secretary and a battery of cameras. She checked her watch. Third period was a pep rally. The gym would be full, the hallways empty, and the noise would provide the perfect acoustic cover. She just needed a distraction, something loud enough to draw Miller away from his desk. She looked at the fire alarm pull station. It was too cliché. She needed something more surgical. The pep rally was a cacophony of screeching sneakers and over-amplified music. Sarah stood at the back of the gym, her arms crossed, watching the exits. She saw the security guard from the night before standing by the north door. He was scanning the crowd, but his eyes weren't on the students. They were on her. He knew she had been there. He just didn't have proof. Yet. Sarah caught Leo's eye and gave him a nearly imperceptible nod. 2 minutes later, every screen in the gymnasium, the scoreboards, the digital announcements, even the teachers' tablets, flickered to life. Instead of the school mascot, they displayed a scrolling list of offshore bank accounts and wire transfer records. The name Miller appeared in bold red letters every few lines. The chaos was instant. Miller bolted toward the stage, screaming for the AV club to shut it down. The security guard moved toward the control booth. The distraction was perfect. Sarah slipped out of the gym and moved like a shadow toward the administrative wing. She reached the server room in less than 40 seconds. The door was locked with a biometric scanner, a high-end upgrade that had no business being in a public high school. Sarah didn't use a hack. She used a small vial of silver nitrate powder and a strip of adhesive tape. She lifted the residual print from the Enter button, applied it to the scanner, and felt the satisfying click of the solenoid. Inside, the room was freezing. Rows of servers hummed, their blue lights blinking in the dark. Sarah bypassed the main console and went straight for the floorboards. She felt for the seam she'd seen on the map. It was hidden beneath a heavy rack of battery backups. She moved the rack with a strength that would have shocked her colleagues, the result of years of tactical conditioning. Underneath was a steel hatch with a rotary combination lock. She worked the dial, her sensitive fingers feeling for the drop of the tumblers. Left to 14, right to 32, left to 09. The coordinates of her final extraction point from 10 years ago. Someone had built this specifically for her. The hatch opened with a hiss of pressurized air. A ladder led down into a well-lit corridor that smelled of ozone and expensive cologne. As she descended, she realized this wasn't just a basement. It was a signal intelligence suite. Screens lined the walls showing live feeds from every room in the school. But there were others. Feeds from the local police station, the mayor's office, and a satellite link that was currently downloading encrypted files from a server in Langley. She wasn't just in a school. She was standing in the center of a regional surveillance nest, and in the middle of the room sat a single, pristine desk with a file folder labeled Operation Cinders. Sarah opened the folder. The first page was a photo of her, taken 6 months ago in her classroom. The second was a photo of her 10 years ago, standing over a body in a rain-slicked alley in Berlin. The text underneath was a cold summary of her death. The Bureau had burned her, or so she thought, but Operation Cinders suggested she wasn't just hidden, she was being monitored as a dormant asset. "I wondered how long it would take you to find the basement, Sarah," a voice said from the shadows. Sarah didn't jump. She didn't even turn around. She recognized the cadence. It was Marcus, the counselor. He stepped into the light, his empathetic facade replaced by the cold, calculating expression of a handler. He wasn't holding a weapon, but he didn't need to. He knew her triggers. "You've been watching me for 3 years, Marcus? Why now?" Sarah's voice was like ice. "Because you started looking at the books," Marcus said, leaning against a server rack. "The map wasn't for you to find. It was a test to see if you were still sharp. You passed, but you also made a mistake. You involved the boy." Sarah felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. Leo. Where is he? He's with Miller and the contractors. They think he's the one who hacked the system. They don't know he was just your distraction. But if you don't give me the drive you just pulled from that server, they're going to treat him like a foreign combatant. Sarah looked at the drive in her hand. She hadn't even realized she'd pulled it. Muscle memory was a dangerous thing. She looked back at Marcus. This isn't just a school, and this isn't just a surveillance hub. You're running a black site interrogation center right under the feet of 1,000 teenagers. It's the perfect cover. The noise, the traffic, the constant flux of people. No one looks twice at a school. Now, the drive, Sarah, for the boy's sake. Sarah calculated the odds. There was one guard she knew of, plus Miller and Marcus, but contractors implied a team. She needed to level the playing field. She tossed the drive toward Marcus, but she aimed for the gap between the server racks. As Marcus lunged for it, Sarah moved. She didn't strike to kill, not yet. She delivered a crushing blow to her solar plexus, followed by a sweep of his legs. As he hit the floor, she grabbed his radio and his sidearm, a compact 9mm she knew he'd be carrying. "The boy," she hissed, her knee pinned against Marcus's throat. "Boiler room," Marcus gasped. "Miller is panicking. He's gonna burn it all down." Sarah didn't hesitate. She used Marcus's own zip ties to secure him to the server rack and headed for the maintenance tunnels. She knew the layout now. The school was a labyrinth, but she was the Minotaur. The air in the maintenance tunnels was thick with the smell of rust and old steam. Sarah moved with a predatory silence, the 9mm held in a low, ready position. She could hear voices echoing through the pipes, Miller's shrill, panicked tones, and the low, rumbling response of the mercenary guard. "Cannot have this leak!" Miller was shouting. "The board of directors will have my head. If the kid talked, he's a liability." "The kid hasn't said a word," the guard replied. "He's tougher than he looks. But the woman, she's the problem. She's not just a teacher. My guys saw how she moved in the library. She's a pro." Sarah reached the heavy steel door of the boiler room. She peered through the reinforced glass slat. Leo was tied to a chair in the center of the room, his face bruised but his eyes defiant. Miller was pacing, clutching a gasoline canister. He wasn't a killer. He was a coward pushed into a corner, which made him infinitely more dangerous. The mercenary was standing near the door, his hand on his holster. Sarah knew a direct breach was suicide. She looked at the overhead steam pipes. They were old, corroded, and under immense pressure. She found the bypass valve 10 feet back. She took a breath, whispered a silent apology to the school's heating budget, and cranked the valve to its limit. The pipes groaned, a high-pitched whistle building to a scream. Inside the room, the guard looked up, distracted. Sarah didn't wait. She fired a single shot into the pressure gauge on the wall. The pipe exploded in a cloud of scalding white steam. In the chaos, Sarah kicked the door open. The steam provided a perfect veil. She stayed low, moving toward Leo. She heard the guard fire blindly into the mist. Sarah didn't return fire. She tracked the muzzle flash. 3 shots later, the guard slumped against the boiler, his leg shattered. She reached Leo and sliced his zip ties with her letter opener. "Can you walk?" Leo coughed, wiping soot from his face. "I can run, but Miss Thorne, Miller, he has a remote." Sarah turned just as the steam began to clear. Miller was standing by the back exit, his face pale and sweating. In his hand was a small black transmitter.
I've rigged with server rooms, Sarah. If I go down, this whole wing goes with me. The evidence, the files, everything. You'll be the one they blame, the unstable teacher who snapped." Sarah leveled her gun at Miller's chest. Her hand was rock steady. "You won't do it, Miller. You love your life too much. You love the suits and the power. In prison, you're just another name. But if you blow this place, you're a dead man before the smoke clears." "You think I have a choice?" Miller cried. "They'll kill me anyway." "Who?" Sarah stepped closer, her voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm whisper. "Who is they?" Miller's thumb hovered over the button. Before he could answer, a red dot appeared on his forehead. A silent shot shattered the window behind him, and Miller collapsed before he could press the trigger. Sarah tackled Leo to the floor as a second shot pinged off the boiler. The sniper wasn't one of Miller's. It was a cleanup crew. "Stay down," Sarah commanded, her voice cutting through Leo's panic. The sniper was positioned on the roof of the science wing, roughly 200 yards away. A professional distance. This wasn't Marcus's team. This was the they Miller was afraid of. The mercenary guard she'd shot was crawling toward his gun. Sarah didn't even look. She fired a round into the floor inches from his hand. "Don't." The guard froze. "Leo, I need you to listen," Sarah said, keeping her eyes on the window. "The server room is rigged. I need you to get to the main junction box in the hallway and bypass the trigger. Can you do that without getting shot?" I think so, but what about the sniper?" "I'm going to give him a different target," Sarah said. She grabbed Miller's discarded jacket and stuffed it with a bundle of rags from a maintenance cart. She shoved it toward the door. As expected, a shot rang out, shredding the jacket. Sarah used the split second to roll toward the side window, shattering it with the butt of her gun. She fired 3 rounds in the direction of the science wing, not to hit, but to suppress. "Go, Leo, now!" The boy scrambled out the door. Sarah watched him vanish into the hallway. Now she was alone with a dying mercenary and a dead principal. She checked Miller's pockets. She found a burner phone and a set of keys with a logo she recognized. A stylized hawk. Blackwood Security. They weren't just a firm. They were a private intelligence contractor used by the Department of Defense. The burner phone buzzed. A text message appeared. Status. Sarah typed back, "Package secured, teacher neutralized, awaiting extraction." The reply was instant. "Extraction at South Bus Loop in 0500. Bring the drive." Sarah looked at the mercenary. "Who's coming for the extraction?" The man laughed, a wet, rattling sound. "You're already dead, lady. You just haven't stopped moving yet." Sarah ignored him. She had 5 minutes. She needed to clear the sniper and get to the bus loop. But she also needed the drive Marcus had dropped. She sprinted back toward the maintenance tunnel, her heart hammering a rhythm she hadn't felt in a decade. She reached the hidden basement just as Marcus was finishing cutting through his zip ties with a piece of broken glass. They locked eyes. No words were needed. Marcus lunged, but Sarah was faster. She used his momentum against him, slamming him into the server rack. She snatched the drive from the floor and pressed the 9mm against his temple. "The Hawk logo, Marcus. Who are they?" Marcus smiled, blood coating his teeth. "They're the ones who pay for the silence, Sarah, and they're already on the property." Outside, the sound of a heavy turbine echoed over the school. A helicopter. They weren't just sending a car, they were sending a strike team. The helicopter's searchlights swept the school grounds, turning the night into a strobing nightmare. Sarah dragged Marcus toward the stairwell. She couldn't leave him, and she couldn't kill him. He was her only leverage. "Leo, status!" she shouted into her stolen radio. "Bypassed! But Miss Thorne, there are men in black gear coming through the front entrance. They have suppressed rifles. They're not police." "Get to the auditorium, Leo. Hide in the catwalks. Do not come down until I say the code word, redcoat. Understand?" "Got it." Sarah pushed Marcus into the hallway. The school's alarm system was finally blaring, a late reaction to the chaos. Sprinklers hissed to life, drenched in the red glow of the emergency lights. Sarah felt the familiar hum of adrenaline. This was her element. She reached the south bus loop just as the helicopter began its hover. Two men rappelled down, landing with practiced precision. They were Blackwood operators, top tier, expensive, and ruthless. Sarah stayed behind a concrete pillar, Marcus shielded in front of her. "I have the drive," she yelled over the roar of the rotors. "And I have your handler. You want to talk, or do you want to start cleaning up more bodies?" The operators froze, their rifles leveled. One of them touched his headset. After a tense moment, he lowered his weapon. A third man stepped out from behind a parked school bus. He wasn't in tactical gear. He was wearing a charcoal gray suit that cost more than Sarah's annual salary. "Vance," Sarah spat. "I should have known you'd be behind this. Still selling national secrets to the highest bidder?" Vance smiled thinly. "I prefer the term information brokerage, and you're holding a very valuable piece of it. That drive contains the identities of every deep cover asset in the tri-state area, including yours, by the way. If you give it to me, you can go back to being a teacher. We'll even give you a raise." "And the boy?" "The boy is an unfortunate witness, but we can be flexible." Sarah knew Vance's flexibility usually involved a shallow grave. She looked at Marcus, then at the operators. She saw the slight shift in the lead operator's weight. They were going to fire the moment she moved. "Okay," Sarah said, holding the drive up. "Let's trade." She tossed the drive toward Vance. As his eyes followed the plastic rectangle, Sarah didn't run. She shoved Marcus toward the operators and dived behind the bus. The world exploded in gunfire. The bus windows shattered, showering Sarah and glass. She didn't wait for them to flank her. She crawled under the bus, the cold asphalt scraping her elbows. She pulled a small, incendiary device from her tactical belt, something she'd recovered from the basement's emergency kit. She slid it towards the helicopter's landing skids. 3, 2, 1. A bloom of white-hot magnesium light blinded the operators. Sarah scrambled out from under the bus and sprinted towards the school's main breaker box, located on the exterior wall. She didn't need to see it, she knew the layout by heart. She smashed the lock with her gun and pulled the main lever. The school plunged into absolute darkness. The searchlight from the helicopter was the only source of light, but it was erratic, the pilot struggling with the glare from the magnesium. Sarah moved through the darkness like a wraith. She knew these hallways. She had walked them every day for 3 years. She knew which floorboards creaked and which doors swung silent. She circled back to the administrative wing, entering through a window she'd left unlatched. She found the operators in the hallway, using thermal goggles. But Sarah had prepared for that. She grabbed a fire extinguisher and pulled the pin, filling the hallway with a thick, cold mist that scrambled their thermal signatures. In the whiteout, she was a blur of violence. She took the first operator down with a knife hand strike to the throat, stripping his rifle before he hit the ground. The second operator turned, but Sarah was already behind him. A quick transition, a sharp snap, and he was unconscious. She didn't kill them, she needed them alive for what came next. She gathered their radios and their zip ties. "Vance!" she shouted, her voice echoing through the empty halls. "The police are 3 minutes out. I triggered the silent alarm at the station before I cut the power. You can't kill everyone before they get here." Vance's voice came over the intercom, sounding strained. "You're bluffing, Sarah. You hate the police. You know they're just as compromised as anyone else." "Maybe," Sarah said, moving toward the auditorium, "but the local news isn't. Leo, are you there?" "I'm here," Leo's voice crackled over the radio. "Did you send the files?" "Every single one," Leo said, a hint of pride in his voice. "To the Washington Post, the FBI Internal Affairs, and, Reddit. It's trending, Miss Thorne." Sarah leaned against a locker, a grim smile on her face. "You hear that, Vance? You're not just a criminal now, you're a meme." The sound of sirens began to wail in the distance. Real ones this time. Vance knew the game was over. The helicopter began to lift, abandoning the ground team.
Sarah watched through a window as the bird disappeared into the night sky. She found Vance in the library, sitting at the very table where she had found the first book. He looked tired, his expensive suit ruined by the sprinklers. He didn't have a gun out. He was just looking at the empty shelf. "Why the books, Vance?" Sarah asked, her rifle trained on his heart. "Why such a theatrical way to hide a map?" Vance laughed softly. "It wasn't my idea. It was the librarian's." He had a sense of irony. He wanted the history teacher to find the history of her own betrayal in a history book. "The librarian is dead," Sarah said. "I saw the report." "Is he? Or did he just find a better place to hide than a high school?" Vance looked at her. "You think you've won because you leaked some files. You've just painted a target on this town. Blackwood was the shield, Sarah. Now the people who are actually paying Miller, they're going to come for the cleanup." "Let them come," Sarah said. "I'm not a ghost anymore." The police burst through the doors, led by the local sheriff, a man Sarah Meehl was honest but overwhelmed. She didn't drop her weapon immediately. She waited until they saw Vance, until they saw the bound operators, and until Leo walked out of the auditorium with his hands up. Safe. Only then did she lay the rifle on the floor and put her hands behind her head. The next hour was a blur of flashbulbs, shouting, and statements. Sarah played the part of the traumatized teacher perfectly. She told them about the men with guns who broke in, about how she'd used her self-defense training to protect a student. She didn't mention the Bureau. She didn't mention Berlin. As they led Vance away in handcuffs, he leaned toward her. "The map had a second page, Sarah, the one you didn't find. It wasn't just a map of the school. It was a map of the staff." Sarah watched him go, her expression unreadable. She walked over to Leo, who was being wrapped in a shock blanket by an EMT. "You did good, Leo," she said quietly. "Miss Thorne, are you going to be in trouble?" "I think I'm going to be taking some medical leave, Leo, just like Mrs. Gable." She walked away from the flashing lights toward her car. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, crumpled piece of paper she'd snatched from Vance's desk during the chaos. It was the second page. Sarah sat in her darkened living room, the second page of the map spread out on her coffee table. Vance was right. It wasn't just the school's structural layout, it was a behavioral map of the faculty. Every teacher had a notation. Miller, greed, Marcus, controlled, Gable, compromised. But her finger stopped at the bottom of the list. Her own name wasn't there. Instead, there was a different name for the history teacher position, dated 3 years ago. Real Sarah Thorne, deceased, auto accident, 2022. Sarah stared at the words. She felt a cold shiver that had nothing to do with the night air. She reached up and touched the faint scar behind her ear, a surgical mark she'd been told was from the Berlin incident. She pulled a mirror close, looking at her eyes, her jawline, the way her skin pulled over her cheekbones. She remembered Berlin. She remembered the rain. But she realized with a sickening clarity that she didn't remember her childhood. She didn't remember her parents' faces, only photos of them. She didn't remember the name of her first pet. She grabbed her phone and dialed a number she hadn't called in a decade, a number that shouldn't exist. "Archive," and answered a voice. "Identity check," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "Subject Thorne, Sarah, serial 992 Alpha." There was a long silence, the sound of typing. Subject 992 Alpha was a successful infiltration and replacement test. The asset was deployed to Oak Ridge High 3 years ago to monitor the Blackwood hub. Asset believed she was the original Sarah Thorne due to Class A memory grafting. Sarah dropped the phone. She wasn't a retired agent hiding in a school. She was a weapon that had been programmed to think she was a retired agent hiding in a school. The secret past she'd been protecting was a lie, designed to give her the skills necessary to protect the site.
She looked at the map again. Now she saw the hidden symbols she'd missed before. They weren't just room markers, they were activation codes. She stood up, her movements sudden and jerky, her history teacher persona dissolving like smoke. She walked to her bookshelf and pulled a copy of The Rise and Fall of the Great Powers, the one she had at home. Inside was a compartment. It didn't contain a map. It contained a single black earbud and a new set of orders. Welcome back, Alpha. The school was just phase 1. Now we go to the capital. Sarah looked at her reflection in the darkened window. The quiet teacher was gone. The hero was a myth. There was only the asset. And the asset had work to do. She picked up her bag, checked her 9mm, and walked out into the night, leaving the door wide open. The map was finished, but the war was just beginning. Would you like me to start developing the Phase 2, the capital mission for Sarah?